If you're currently studying for your CompTIA Security Plus exam, then this is the video for you because I passed my exam on my first attempt. And in this video, we're going to go over 10 practice questions from domain 4 of the exam objectives, security operations. So let's get started. Question 1. Which of the following is most likely to be performed if reusing a hard drive is the priority? Sanitization, destruction, certification, or code signing? And the correct answer is data sanitization because this refers to the process of using specific software in order to remove all the data on that hard drive and ensure that even if a digital forensics team were to come in, they still would not be able to recover that data because you've deleted every single bit of data on that drive. Destruction refers to the literal destruction of that device using something like a hammer or a shredder. Certification refers to a literal certificate that a third party will give you once they sanitize and destroy your hard drive. But the problem with destruction and certification is that they're destroying the drive so that you can't reuse it after the fact, making sanitization the only correct answer here. Code signing is the concept of application developers implementing integrity because they're putting their own digital signatures in that file so that you can be assured that you're actually running a legitimate application from that official company. Question 2. An administrator is using security clearances to label resources in an organization. Which of the following best describes this process? MAC, DAC, ABAC, or time of day restrictions? And the correct answer is MAC or mandatory access control. This describes a control type that is implemented in highly secured environments, such as the military, to ensure data security and to restrict access to data that users shouldn't have access to. So in Mac, every device and every file and every user is assigned a security clearance, and all a security clearance is something like secret or top secret or confidential. It's just a label that defines whether or not a user would be able to gain access to a particular file. So for example, if a user had the label or the security clearance of secret, but they were attempting to access a file that has the label of top secret, they simply would not be able to access that file because they don't have the authorization to do so. Now, if a user had the security clearance or the security label of secret, but they were trying to access a file that has also the label of secret, they would have access to view and modify that file. DAC describes discretionary access control, and this is the implementation that I'm using right now and that you're probably using too. And this involves the file owner deciding who can access, change, view, modify, or read a file on the system. So this is used both in Linux and in Windows by default if you're doing this by yourself on a virtual machine. ABAC describes attribute-based access control, and this describes authenticating users not just based on a single set of controls, such as a username or password, but rather it is based on a set of attributes. For example, where is this device connecting from? Are there any Bluetooth devices around that device? What time of day is this device logging in from? From what operating system is this device logging in from? Where is this request coming from in the network? And so on and so forth. Time of day restrictions refers to restrictions that deny users access to, for example, log into their account or log into data past certain times of the day, because you don't want users, I assume, logging in at like 3 o'clock in the morning, performing some nefarious action, like an insider threat. Question 3. An organization is prioritizing the remediation of high-level vulnerabilities on network devices. Which of the following should they most likely implement? CVSS, Dark Web, CVE, or OSINT? And the correct answer is CVSS because this describes the Common Vulnerability Scoring System. And this is a system that assigns a severity score and rating to vulnerabilities so that you can prioritize and remediate your vulnerabilities effectively. So for example, if I perform a vulnerability scan using, for example, the Nessus scanning software, and it detects the WannaCry ransomware vulnerability on my system, then the CVSS would assign that vulnerability of a rating of 10 out of 10 because it's such a severe vulnerability. And if it's a 10 out of 10, then we know to prioritize the remediation and patching of that vulnerability as opposed to if it had detected other lesser vulnerabilities, such as a 4 out of 10 or a 3 out of 10 rated vulnerability. CVE is common vulnerabilities and exposures. This describes a catalog that provides you with a brief description of vulnerabilities. Dark web is the Tor network, is the onion router. And finally, OSINT describes open source intelligence. This is any publicly available information that you may find online, whether it's through search engines, whether it's through something like DuckDuckGo or Yandex, whether it's through a YouTube video, whether it's through LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, whatever. All of this is considered OSINT because it's publicly available and accessible information. Question 4. A company desires a method of securing and handling mobile devices, ensuring data security. Which of the following should they most likely implement? CYOD, COPE, BYOD, or MDM? And the correct answer is MDM because this is a mobile device manager and this is a piece of software, typically something like Microsoft Intune, that would allow you to secure and to manage all the mobile devices in that organization. So with MDM, you can do things like a remote wipe, which will allow you to wipe all the data on that remote device, or it could allow you to use an application allow list or an application deny list, which would only allow the users in the organization to install certain applications onto their mobile device. BYOD is bring your own device. This is the concept of users or employees bringing in their own personal devices, but for work purposes, into the workplace. COPE is corporate owned but personally enabled. This is a mix between having a corporate owned device and personally enabled. And finally, CYOD is choose your own device. This describes when the organization provides you with a list of devices that they've purchased so that you may select from a list of devices what device you want to use in the workplace. Question 5. Which of the following would most likely be used to prevent sensitive data from being transferred outside the organization? Data loss prevention, file integrity monitoring, intrusion detection system, or intrusion prevention system? And the correct answer is a data loss prevention system, or a DLP. This would indeed prevent sensitive data from being transferred outside the organization, whether it's through email or even through a USB drive. If an attacker is attempting to exfiltrate company data using removable media, that data loss prevention system can look for this in its rules if it's configured properly, and it can block this data extraction. File integrity monitoring, or FIM as you'll see it in the exam objectives, is a piece of software that detects in real time whenever a file hash is changed or modified, because your file hashes should never be just changed at random. You know that something malicious going on there. Intrusion detection system, or an IDS, is a system that while it can't proactively block threats, unlike an IPS, it can actively detect threats in real time and notify or alert the administrator of that system. So IPS, it can indeed proactively block real-time malware threats, but we're looking for DLP to prevent sensitive data from leaving the organization. Question 6. A user is being logged into another service through a trusted identity provider. Which of the following best describes this scenario? Federation, SSO, FIM, or antivirus? And the correct answer is Federation because this describes when you have a third-party identity provider that trusts the website or the service that you're currently using, and it logs you in using that service. So for example, earlier today, I was using udemy.com, this website that I'm on right now, and when I visited udemy.com, I didn't even have the intention of logging in, but it started logging me in with my Google account because Udemy trusts Google and Google trusts Udemy, so it allowed me to log in without having to manually enter in my credentials. SSO is single sign-on. It's the concept of using a single set of credentials to access multiple services, and this would typically be used in Active Directory. FIM is file integrity monitoring. This is the concept of a piece of software that analyzes and looks for changes in real time to file hashes. And finally, antivirus is a piece of software that proactively blocks real time threats on a device. Question 7. A Linux user is modifying a file's permissions for all existing users on the system. Which of the following is occurring? Mandatory access control, least privilege, rule-based access control, or discretionary access control? And the correct answer is discretionary access control, or DAC, because this describes the file owner modifying file permissions on the system because they have the authorization to do so, which is the opposite of MAC, or mandatory access control, whereby file permissions are restricted using the operating system kernel itself or a separate network administrator who had nothing to do with creating the file. They can still have authorization over who can access those files. Whereas in DAC, of course, it's the file owner themselves who manages the file and who decides who can access it. Rule-based access control, or RBAC, this describes security systems that perform their functions using rules. So for example, data loss prevention systems, or DLPs, use rules. WAFs, web application firewalls, use rules. IPS use rules, intrusion prevention systems. Even firewalls use rules. So these are all examples of rule-based access control. Finally, least privilege is the concept of users, employees, or anyone in an organization who shouldn't have excessive rights or permissions beyond what they need to perform any of their daily jobs or tasks. Question 8. An organization is currently using a VPN username and password, fingerprint authentication, and user account pins. Which of the following would add an additional authentication factor? Something you know, something you have, somewhere you are, or something you are? And the correct answer is something you have, because this describes a physical object that you hold in your hand that will be used to provide authentication. So for example, if you have a mobile phone that has a one-time PIN, or if you have a smart card to log in, or a USB or a security token, these are all examples of something you physically have. Something you know is something like a username, password, or a PIN. And finally, fingerprint authentication is something you are. It's a biometric. Other examples of biometrics are iris scans and retina scans. Finally, somewhere you are is associated with adaptive identity in the policy engine, which is associated with things like geolocation, GPS, or IP addresses to uniquely identify exactly where you are. Question 9. Which of the following incident response phases involves permanently removing malware from a system? Recovery, containment, lessons learned, or eradication? And the correct answer is eradication, because this is the incident response phase that actually involves removing or eradicating malware off that system. After that, you'd perform the recovery phase, which involves using backups to get back to a previous known good state. Containment is the process of isolating or quarantining the infected systems so that that malware doesn't spread to other devices in the network. And finally, lessons learned is the very last step in the incident response process. This involves looking at what we did good, what we did bad, and last but certainly not least for your exam, it involves the root cause analysis, involving the root cause of the attack, how the attacker actually managed to breach the organization and get in. Question 10. Which of the following would best prevent against a web form-based vulnerability? IDS, Radius, Input Validation, or MDM? And the correct answer is input validation, because input validation is the concept of blocking out certain characters, such as apostrophes, hashtags, dollar signs, and so on. It would literally block that so that an attacker could not enter in these characters into your web form. So this would help protect against attacks such as cross-site scripting or SQL injection vulnerabilities. Radius is remote authentication dial-in user service, and this is the most popular network authentication mechanism. IDS, intrusion detection system, can only detect threats. It can't actually prevent or block threats in real time, unlike an IPS that can. Finally, an MDM, mobile device manager, is used to secure your devices and handle and manage all the mobile devices in the organization. So, those were the 10 questions of this domain, of domain 4. And if you are genuinely serious about passing your Security Plus exam on your first attempt, just as I did, then click the link in the description and join my Telegram group. Because there, I post daily tips and tricks on exactly how to pass your Security Plus exam on your first attempt, just as I did. I tell you what I did wrong, what I did good, and what I wished I had done, not only during the exam, but before the exam, that would have improved my chances of getting an even better score the first time around. So, click the link, join the group, and I'll see you there.